Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was January 27th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcora Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today's document is from Joan, and it's in a register called the Commune Register, and this register appears to be one that contains documents that are not as sensitive and are maybe responses to petitions that are, I guess, like regular business in some ways, you could say, like not matters of, intrigue or like diplomacy necessarily, but internal business like arrangements. Again, these categories, they're very difficult to separate out in my mind because, what makes this commune register or commune register different from the officialum. I think officialum is about appointments, and this one's about maybe petitions, but then there's also other registers that have results of petitions or decisions about petitions in them. So that's one of the goals of the whole podcast, is to, figure that out. Okay, so here we've got one from Joan, and the initial line for the addressee is a little bit different, and I'm not quite sure why. It's in Latin again. We are embracing Latin now. And I am just going to take a pass on digging into the very beginning of this letter, because I think that it's just maybe a variation of the kind of opening that one sees a lot. I'm going to keep my eye on these openings and see if this one comes back again. But it starts out with something like Satis Guidem. I can't quite figure out the expansions of the abbreviations here. But then we get to the name of the addressee in the second line, Nicolas de Pomerio. And what's nice about this register is that the person's name, who's the main addressee of the letter, appears at the top above the text block. So that's nice. And then I eventually figured out that the place name at the end of the second line is in Catalan Ripoll. There's a very old monastery in Ripoll that gives me the chance to mention the name of, I think, probably my favorite person in early Middle Ages Iberian history. Well, not favorite person, but favorite name. Wilfrid the Hairy. Yes, someone has gone down in history as Wilfrid the Hairy. Wilfrid the Hairy was a Visigoth who was fighting against Muslims in Iberia and captured the town of Ripoll and helped to found a Benedictine monastery there. And I just am very tickled by the name Wilfrid the Hairy. It's just really funny. But, okay, so we have an appearance from Wilfrid the Hairy, finally. And the subject matter of this letter has nothing to do with Wilfrid and his apparent hairiness, But instead, we are looking at something that came up in yesterday's document from Violante, which is the dispersal or rearrangement of the properties and authorities of the da Fortias. So, yesterday we saw Violante rearranging some kind of authority arrangement that had previously been in the portfolio of Bernat da Fortía. And today we've got something like that going on with a office or authority that had been in Sibilla da Fortía's portfolio. So, for those of you that have not listened to any earlier episodes about Sibilla, this is a major figure at this point in the story of Joan and Violante. Sibilla da Fortía was the queen before Violante. And here, in this line of this letter, she's not referred to as queen. What she's referred to is something like Servissimi Domini Petri Regis Felicis. And what that phrase means is something like most servant-like of the Lord King Peter Père. So already we're seeing rhetorically Joan downgrading Sibilla, and the two words that come before Sibilla's name are fabulosam suggestionem. And I consulted with ChatGPT on the Latin here and then confirmed the way that it interpreted fabulosam as something like slander, slanderous, and it's more like, I think it could be slanderous. I looked at two different Latin dictionaries, and gossipy is the way that it seems to be coming through in the dictionaries, but certainly these words can have a change of valence in different times and places. So there's something happening here where there was some kind of slanderous statement or bad statement from Sibilla, and now Joan is getting involved at the behest of this Nicolas de Pomerio in regard to an issue in Ripoll in the monastery. There's another name that appears further down in this letter, Guillermo de Bardo. Can't quite figure out what's going on with him. But then in line 13, there's the phrase sub pena millem florem auri, which means under the punishment of 1,000 gold florins. So basically, something's happening that Joan is saying, stop doing that or you're going to be fined a whole lot of money. And exactly what is the subject of this fine? What is it that Joan is trying to put a stop to? How is it a change from what was going on when this was all being run by Sibilla? All these questions are ones that will be unlocked if I can learn Latin to a higher degree than is my Latin ability now. This letter, I think I'm going to come back to. And yesterday, when I was looking at the letter from Violante, I thought to myself, I'm probably not going to come back to this. But actually, now that I've got a pairing between Violante's letter having to do with a property of Bernat de Fortía, and now I've got the next day a document from Joan that has to do with something Sibilla da Fortía had been in charge of. Now I've got an interesting pairing that could help me get at the question of how Joan and Violante were working as a team, which is one of my big questions that I'm trying to figure out as I look through all these documents. And so now I'm curious, and at a later stage, after I've had more Latin practice, which is something I am embracing and going to be doing in the coming months, I'll come back to this one, and I think I'll be able to unlock its meaning a little bit more, and then also I'll be able to figure out maybe some hints regarding that big question of how Joan and Violante worked together. One last thing I want to mention is that I did a search using ChatGPT for Nicolas de Pomerio and his involvement with the Ripoll Monastery, and ChatGPT did seem to return some dependable references for that association. And so that helped me actually to decide on the place name at the end of the line, because I didn't mention this before, but I was really having a hard time getting from what I'm looking at on the page to Ripoll, which is spelled Ripoll. And the first letter of the place name there at the end of line 2, it's an R, but it at first glance looks like a B. But these R's, the scribes would really go all out with capital R, like all kinds of additional curls and loops and fanciness. So if you're looking at something that is capital letter and it's got a lot of flourish, you should really think of it as a likely R. And be skeptical about the other possibilities, especially if you've got something where the most bold parts of it, like in this situation, if you take out the lighter strokes and just look at the heavier strokes of that letter, then you've got something that looks like an R. But then look at how many strokes of the pen there are between the capital letter and the letter P. There's so many. And in the Catalan spelling, it's just R-I-P. But here we've got something like another R and maybe a U and then an I. What you have maybe noticed if you've been looking at some of these documents is that sometimes the initial letter is doubled when you've got a proper noun. You see this a lot. We will see this all the time next month when we start looking at letters and documents from February. Because pretty much all the time, well, a lot of the time, February is spelled with 2 F's. So that's something to look forward to. But let's pull back for a moment from the very close attention to that one specific word. And I just want to reiterate that there are a lot of questions about the context of this document as well as yesterday's. I am just really curious about how much work it was to bring in the new regime, because on one level, things probably have a certain inertia to them, where when one monarch takes over from the previous, you can just things just kind of keep going, like everybody wants to keep getting paid, so on and so forth. But then there's going to be certain things where there's just urgent attention required in order to undo some of the arrangements that are problematic for the way you want to run things. And specifically, I think there's a kind of slicing and dicing of a lot of the portfolio that was from the former queen, the former queen's brother, and these are going to get rearranged, and certain people who might have been well known for being quite loyal to the previous person, they're going to be replaced by others who perhaps have more trust on the part of Joan and Violante. Are we seeing that here? Is that a lot of work? Is it something that is an easy process, or is it going to take some follow-ups to make sure things are happening the way they want them to? So how rough, how smooth is the transition? That's the larger question that I have. And also how much work falls on the monarchs themselves versus officials that are in the know about all these different places. So those are just some of the questions. Many, many questions always come up with each and every document, which is why the motto of the podcast is, of course, dissatisfaction guaranteed. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Compagnona. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violante de Bar. In the meantime, take care.